Jamie Brooks is not here. Nathaniel Crawford stopped in the middle of the executive floor as if someone had just informed him that gravity had taken the morning off. At 8:17 on Monday, Jamie's desk was empty. No coffee beside the keyboard, no tablet displaying Nate's schedule, no neatly arranged folders waiting for signatures. In almost 3 years as Nate's assistant, Jamie had never arrived late without warning. He had worked through subway delays, Boston snowstorms, impossible clients, and meetings scheduled by people who apparently believed sleep was optional. Yet 7 days before Nate's wedding, Jamie had simply vanished. Did he call? Nate asked. The receptionist shook her head. No, sir. Nate pulled out his phone and called Jamie. No answer. He waited 30 seconds and tried again. Nothing. The third call went directly to voicemail. Nate disliked uncertainty. In his world, uncertainty usually meant someone had failed to prepare. Jamie did not fail to prepare. That was precisely why the silence bothered him. Nate entered his office and immediately noticed how much of his morning depended on one person. His revised meeting schedule was missing. The wedding planner had sent 12 questions overnight. His legal team wanted approval on a contract before noon. Somehow Jamie usually transformed that chaos into a simple list before Nate arrived. Nate opened his calendar and found a note Jamie had entered Friday afternoon. Monday, 8 o'clock, confirm final wedding vendors. Beneath it was another reminder. Make sure Nate eats before the Whitmore meeting. Nate stared at that line longer than necessary. Then he called Jamie once more. Still nothing. By 8:31, Nate had Jamie's employee file open. The address listed a modest apartment building in Jamaica Plain, less than 5 miles away. His operations manager appeared at the office door. Your 9 o'clock meeting is ready. Move it. The man blinked. Nathaniel Crawford did not move meetings. Other people moved their lives around Nathaniel Crawford. To when? 10:30. Nate picked up his coat and postponed anything before then. Is something wrong? Nate glanced at Jamie's empty desk. I do not know. That answer followed him all the way downstairs. Nate could have sent someone. He could have asked human resources to perform a wellness check or told another assistant to keep calling. Instead, 20 minutes later, he parked across from Jamie's building and immediately questioned why he had come personally. Concern was the obvious answer, but Nate preferred explanations that were easier to control. The building was older than he expected, with narrow stairs and faded numbers beside each door. Jamie lived on the 3rd floor. Nate knocked once. No response. He knocked again. Jamie. A sound came from inside. Several seconds later, the lock turned. Jamie opened the door wearing sweatpants and an oversized college sweatshirt, his usually neat brown hair completely disorganized. His face looked tired, and a blanket was wrapped around his shoulders. He stared at Nate with such complete disbelief that Nate almost checked whether he had somehow arrived at the wrong apartment. Mr. Crawford? Jamie's voice was rough. You missed work. Jamie blinked. That is why you are here. You did not answer your phone. Jamie reached toward a small table near the door and picked up his phone. The screen remained black. The battery died. Nate studied him. Are you sick? Just a fever and exhaustion. I was going to call as soon as I woke up. Jamie looked past Nate toward the hallway. How did you even know where I live? Employee records. Of course. Jamie rubbed his forehead. I am sorry. Give me 20 minutes and I can log in from home. No. Jamie looked up immediately. No. You are not working with a fever. The Omega seemed genuinely confused by the statement. Then his expression changed. His eyes moved towards something behind him, and for the first time Nate saw alarm rather than embarrassment. Jamie stepped sideways, subtly blocking the view into the apartment. Nate noticed the movement. What is it? Nothing. Jamie, it is really not a good time for you to be here. Nate could see only part of the living room from the doorway, but it was enough to notice cardboard boxes, papers covering a table, and 2 large suitcases standing beside the wall. Jamie tightened his grip on the blanket. Nate's attention moved from the suitcases back to him. Are you going somewhere? Jamie said nothing. Nate had negotiated with executives who could lie without blinking, but Jamie had never been good at hiding anything from him. Finally, Jamie stepped back and opened the door wider. You should probably come inside. Nate entered, expecting an explanation for the luggage. Instead, he looked toward the far wall and stopped. It was covered from one end to the other with wedding schedules, seating charts, vendor notes, handwritten reminders, and photographs of the venue. In the center, printed in large letters, were the words announcing Nate's wedding on Saturday. Jamie saw exactly where he was looking and went completely still. "You were never supposed to come here." Nate did not answer immediately. His attention remained on the wall, where the most important day his family had planned in years had been reduced to hundreds of small decisions, nearly all of them carrying Jamie's handwriting. There were vendor confirmations, transportation schedules, hotel assignments, rehearsal times, and color-coded notes connecting one responsibility to another. None of that surprised him. Jamie was his assistant. Organization was part of the job. What surprised him were the smaller notes tucked between the official documents. Remember his coffee before the rehearsal. Move the press interview earlier because he hates being surrounded after midnight. Make sure he eats before the ceremony. No champagne at his table. Confirm quiet room near reception hall. Nate stepped closer. "You did all of this here?" Jamie pulled the blanket tighter around his shoulders. "Some of it. The wedding planner handled the actual event. I handled your schedule around it." At home, there were too many interruptions at the office. Nate turned. "How many nights?" Jamie avoided his eyes. That was answer enough. Nate looked around the apartment properly for the first time. A laptop sat open on the dining table beside a cold mug of tea. Printed schedules covered one chair. A takeout container remained unopened on the counter. Jamie had apparently spent days making sure Nate remembered to eat while forgetting to do the same for himself. "Sit down," Nate said. Jamie gave him a tired look. "I am already sick. Please do not become my doctor too. I am not qualified." "That has never stopped you from giving orders." Nate almost responded automatically, then stopped. "Would you sit down?" Jamie blinked at the changed wording before lowering himself onto the couch. Nate picked up the unopened container. "When did you last eat?" "Last night." "What time?" "That feels unnecessarily specific." "Jamie." "Around 7. Nate checked the kitchen without asking and found soup in the refrigerator. "You know that is not going to prepare itself," Jamie said. "I am aware of how soup works." "I was not certain." Nate heated it while Jamie watched from the couch with an expression somewhere between exhaustion and disbelief. 5 minutes later, Nate placed the bowl on the coffee table. Jamie stared at it. "If anyone at Crawford Group hears that Nathaniel Crawford heated soup for his assistant, your reputation may never recover." "Then protect my reputation and eat." Jamie smiled faintly and obeyed. Nate returned to the wall. One handwritten note caught his attention because it was not logistical. "Saturday, after reception, give Nate the blue folder." He turned. "What is the blue folder?" Jamie's spoon stopped halfway to his mouth. "Nothing important right now. You wrote yourself a reminder." "I write reminders for everything." Apparently. Nate glanced toward the suitcases near the bedroom door. The connection arrived slowly. Wedding schedules. Packed luggage. A mysterious folder meant for after the reception. "Jamie." The Omega closed his eyes briefly. "Please do not." "Are those suitcases connected to Saturday?" Jamie set the spoon down. "You should go back to the office. Answer the question." "You have meetings." "I moved them." That genuinely startled Jamie. "You moved a meeting?" "Two, actually." "Should I call the newspapers?" Nate ignored that. "Where are you going?" Jamie stood, crossed toward the dining table, and began gathering papers as though tidying them could end the conversation. A blue folder rested beneath his laptop. Nate did not touch it. Jamie noticed where he was looking and immediately picked it up. "This is private." "Then I will not open it." Jamie hesitated, apparently expecting an argument. Nate waited. Finally, Jamie exhaled and placed the folder on the table between them. "You were supposed to receive it Saturday night." "Why?" Jamie looked toward the wedding wall rather than at him. "Because by then it would not matter." Nate opened the folder only after Jamie gave a small nod. The first page was a formal letter addressed to Crawford Group. Nate read the opening sentence once, then again. Jamie Brooks was submitting his resignation, effective immediately after Nate's wedding. Nate slowly lowered the paper. "You are quitting." Jamie said nothing. "After 3 years, you plan to hand me this at my wedding and disappear?" "I plan to finish everything first." Nate looked at the packed suitcases. "Where are you going?" "Chicago. I have an offer there." "Since when?" 3 weeks ago." Nate felt an unfamiliar frustration rising, not because Jamie had another job, but because everyone seemed to know what would happen after Saturday except him. "Why did you not tell me?" Jamie finally met his eyes. The humor had disappeared from his face. "Because if I told you before the wedding, you would ask me to stay." Nate did not hesitate. I am asking now. Jamie's expression became painfully calm. That is exactly why I did not tell you. Nate kept the resignation letter in his hand, but stopped reading it. You think asking you to stay is enough to make you give up Chicago? Jamie looked toward the packed suitcases. I think you are very good at making people believe the thing you need is also the thing they want. Nate's expression tightened. Most people became careful when speaking to him. Jamie, apparently, had decided a fever was an excellent time to abandon caution entirely. Is that what you think I have done to you? Not intentionally. Jamie sat again, suddenly looking more tired than angry. That is the problem. You never had to. Nate placed the letter back inside the blue folder. Then explain it. There is nothing to explain. 3 years of working beside me, and you were going to leave Boston without telling me until the night of my wedding. There is clearly something to explain. Jamie stared at the floor for several seconds. Do you remember the Hartford meeting last November? Nate did. A negotiation had run until nearly 2 in the morning. You had not eaten since breakfast, Jamie continued. I found a diner still open, brought food back to the hotel, moved your morning call, and told everyone you were unavailable until 9. You were doing your job. Jamie gave a small, humorless smile. Exactly. He pointed toward the wedding wall. I know you drink coffee black before noon and add cream when you have not slept. I know you stop answering questions when a room gets too loud. I know you hate champagne, forget lunch when you are worried, and read old novels when you cannot sleep. I know when you need a schedule and when you need everyone to leave you alone. Nate said nothing. Jamie continued more quietly. And every time I learned something else about you, I called it work. The apartment seemed unusually still. Nate glanced at the handwritten reminders covering the wall. For the first time, they no longer looked like administrative notes. They looked like 3 years of attention condensed onto paper. Jamie, please let me finish. Nate nodded. Jamie drew a slow breath. When your engagement was announced, I thought it would make everything easier. There would be a clear line. You would get married. I would remain your assistant, and whatever foolish attachment I had developed would eventually disappear. Nate's gaze sharpened, but Jamie kept going. It did not. Instead, you handed me the wedding schedule and asked me to make sure everything ran perfectly. I did not know. I know. Jamie looked directly at him. That is why I never blamed you. The words landed harder than accusation would have. Grant has done nothing wrong either. I am not trying to interfere with your engagement. I accepted another job because leaving is the only decision here that actually belongs to me. Nate looked at the suitcases again. You were going to organize my wedding, hand me your resignation, and leave the city. Yes. Without giving me a chance to respond. Jamie's voice softened. Respond to what? You are getting married Saturday. Nate opened his mouth, then stopped. The answer should have been obvious. He had an engagement, a ceremony, 2 families expecting hundreds of guests, and business agreements built around the Crawford and Whitmore names. Yet standing in Jamie's small apartment, surrounded by reminders written by the person who knew precisely how he moved through every difficult day, Nate found himself unable to say the simple thing Jamie expected him to say. Jamie noticed. Do not do that. Do what? Look at me like this changes something. It does change something. It should not. Jamie stood and took the blue folder from the table. You have 7 days until your wedding. Go home. Talk to Grant. Finish what you decided to start. I will complete the transition documents before I leave. Nate stared at him. You still think you are working today? Jamie almost smiled. That is what you took from everything I just said. Nate reached for his coat. No, I heard all of it. At the door, he stopped and looked back at the wall one final time. A note beside the rehearsal schedule read, Ask Nate what he wants before confirming. He had probably seen that sentence in Jamie's handwriting 100 times over 3 years. Suddenly, Nate could not remember the last time anyone had asked him the same question about his wedding. He looked at Jamie. Get some rest. I will handle the office. Jamie nodded, clearly relieved that the conversation was ending. Nate stepped into the hallway, but before the door closed, Jamie spoke. Nate. It was the first time that morning he had used his first name. Nate turned. Jamie held the blue folder against his chest. Please do not cancel anything because of me. Nate studied him for a long moment. I will not. Jamie relaxed slightly. Nate continued. But I think it is time I find out whether I ever wanted it for myself. By Monday afternoon, Nate had discovered that questioning a wedding was considerably more complicated than arranging one. His office looked exactly as it always did, But Jamie's empty desk outside made every routine feel slightly wrong. Another assistant had brought Nate coffee with 2 packets of sugar. Nate had taken 1 sip and set it aside. At noon, someone scheduled 3 meetings without leaving him time for lunch. At 1:15, his legal director asked why Nate had not approved a document Jamie normally placed directly in front of him. None of these were serious problems. That was precisely what unsettled him. Jamie had spent 3 years quietly removing hundreds of small inconveniences before Nate ever noticed they existed. At 4, Nate left for the wedding rehearsal meeting at the Whitmore family's Back Bay townhouse. Grant Whitmore was already there with both families, 2 planners, and enough printed schedules to organize a presidential visit. Grant stood when Nate entered. He was polished, calm, and perfectly suited to the future everyone had designed for them. "You are late," Grant said. 9 minutes. Jamie would never allow that. Nate stopped. Grant had meant it as a joke, but the words followed Nate to the table. For the next hour, the planners discussed flowers, transportation, photographs, guest arrivals, and Saturday's reception. Nate listened until one planner asked whether champagne should be placed at the head table. "Of course," Grant answered. "Nate likes champagne." Nate looked at him. "I do not." Grant blinked. "You drank it at our engagement dinner." Because everyone was holding a glass. An uncomfortable silence passed before Grant laughed lightly. "Fine. Whiskey then. I do not drink whiskey at formal events." Grant's smile faded. Nate heard Jamie's voice in his memory. No champagne at his table. He disliked the comparison immediately, yet another question escaped him. "What do I drink when I cannot sleep?" Grant stared at him. "What?" "It is a simple question. Coffee. Tea." Nate leaned back. "What happens when I am in a crowded room too long?" Grant's expression changed from confusion to irritation. "Nathaniel, what exactly are we doing?" Nate had no good answer. Across the room, his mother lowered her schedule. Grant dismissed the planners with surprising calm and waited until the doors closed. "Now tell me what happened." Nate looked toward the window. Jamie resigned. Grant was silent for a moment. "Your assistant?" "After Saturday." "I am sorry. I know you rely on him." There was no jealousy in Grant's voice, only sincere concern, which somehow made Nate feel worse. "He accepted a position in Chicago. Then offer him more money." "That is what I would have done yesterday." Grant studied him carefully. "And today?" Nate remembered the resignation letter, the suitcases, and the wall covered in notes. "Today I realized I never asked why he wanted to leave." Grant folded his arms. "And why does he?" Nate did not answer. Grant understood anyway. His expression softened rather than hardened. "He has feelings for you." Nate looked at him. "He never asked me for anything." "I did not say he did." Grant walked toward the table and picked up one of the wedding schedules. "Do you know what is strange? We have been engaged for 8 months, and I think Jamie has spent more time planning our wedding than either of us." Nate glanced at the papers. "Our families wanted this." "Yes." "You agreed." "So did you." Grant gave a quiet laugh, without humor. "That is not the same as wanting it." Nate finally looked directly at him. Grant continued. "My father said the marriage would stabilize both families, simplify business, and end years of competition. Your mother said practically the same thing. We looked good together, nobody objected, and neither of us had a better plan. That was enough at the time." "Was it?" Nate could not answer. Grant set down the schedule. "Let me ask you something, and do not answer as the head of Crawford Group. Do not answer as your mother's son, or as the alpha everyone expects to have a plan." His voice became quieter. "Do you want to marry me?" Nate had negotiated agreements worth millions without needing more than a few seconds to make a decision. Now he stood in a beautiful room surrounded by evidence of a wedding scheduled for Saturday and discovered that the word yes would not come. Grant watched him for several seconds, then nodded as if the silence had answered everything. "That is what I thought." Nate's phone vibrated. A message from Jamie appeared on the screen. "Fever is down. I finished the transition notes. I will send them tomorrow." Nate read it twice. Grant noticed his expression. "Is that him?" Nate nodded. Grant looked at the wedding schedule between them. "Then maybe the question is not whether your assistant knows you better than I do." Nate raised his eyes. Grant finished quietly. "Maybe the question is why the person you are marrying never needed to." Nate did not leave the Whitmore townhouse immediately. For several minutes, he and Grant stood on opposite sides of the long dining table, while Saturday's carefully arranged future remained spread between them. "You should be angry," Nate finally said. Grant considered that. I might be tomorrow. That would be reasonable. Probably. Grant pulled out a chair and sat. But right now, I think I am mostly relieved that one of us finally asked the question. Nate looked at the engagement ring on his hand. He had worn it for 8 months without giving its weight much thought. If we cancel, there will be consequences. Our families will survive embarrassment. I mean business consequences. I know what you mean. Grant folded the wedding schedule and pushed it aside. But that is exactly how we ended up here. Every time someone asked whether this marriage made sense, we answered with contracts, partnerships, and family expectations. Nobody asked whether we wanted to wake up beside each other 20 years from now. Nate was silent. Grant smiled faintly. You see? You cannot answer that one either. Nate sat across from him. There is something you should know. About Jamie? Yes. You do not have to tell me. He asked me not to cancel the wedding because of him. Grant's expression shifted. Interesting. Why? Because if he wanted to steal you away, that would have been a terrible strategy. Despite himself, Nate almost smiled. Grant continued. So do not make him responsible for whatever happens next. This marriage was our decision before he became part of the question. Ending it has to be ours too. The words settled something in Nate. Jamie had not asked him to choose. Grant was not asking him to stay. For perhaps the first time in years, nobody was. Handing Nate the answer they expected. I do not want to marry you, Nate said. Grant exhaled slowly. Good. Nate raised an eyebrow. Good. Because I do not want to marry you either. A quiet laugh escaped Grant. I would have gone through with it. That is the embarrassing part. I would have stood there Saturday because everyone had already booked hotels. Nate understood. Obligation had become momentum, and momentum had started looking like choice. Grant removed his ring and placed it beside the schedules. Nate looked at his own for another second before doing the same. We tell them together, Grant said. Tonight. Agreed. The conversation with their families lasted nearly 2 hours. Nate's mother asked whether he understood what canceling 5 days before the ceremony would do to the Crawford name. Grant's father listed contracts that might need to be renegotiated. Nate listened to every concern without changing his answer. Grant remained beside him, equally firm. There will be no wedding Saturday, Nate said at last. This is not a negotiation. His mother studied him. Is this because of someone else? Jamie's face appeared immediately in Nate's mind, wrapped in a blanket beside a wall of handwritten reminders. No, he said. It is because I finally understood that agreeing to a marriage is not the same as choosing one. That was the truth, even if Jamie had been the person who forced him to see it. By the time Nate returned to his Beacon Hill home, it was nearly 11. He loosened his tie and found 12 missed messages from planners, relatives, and executives. One message mattered more than the others. Jamie had sent the transition documents exactly as promised. Nate opened them. Every client contact was organized. Every unfinished task had an owner. Every password transfer followed company policy. Jamie had prepared to disappear from Nate's professional life so completely that Nate would have no practical reason to call him afterward. At the bottom of the final page was one sentence. Thank you for trusting me for 3 years. Nate stared at it. He typed a response, deleted it, and tried again. He could have told Jamie everything immediately. Instead, he remembered Grant's warning. Do not make him responsible for whatever happens next. Nate locked his phone without sending anything. The next morning, Jamie returned to the office looking pale but recovered. He stopped beside his desk when he noticed Nate waiting there. You are early, Jamie said carefully. So are you. I have a transition meeting at 8:30. Nate nodded. Jamie glanced at his bare hand and froze. The engagement ring was gone. His eyes lifted slowly to Nate's face. What happened? Nate could have softened the answer. He did not. Grant and I canceled the wedding last night. Jamie went completely still. Nate, you asked me not to do it because of you. Yes. I did not. Jamie searched his expression. Nate continued. I canceled it because when someone finally asked whether I wanted that marriage, I could not say yes. Jamie's hand tightened around the strap of his bag. And what exactly are you expecting me to say? Nate realized, too late, that beneath Jamie's shock was something dangerously close to fear. Nothing. Good. Jamie stepped behind his desk and picked up the blue folder he had brought from home. Because canceling your wedding does not change my decision. Nate looked at the folder. You are still leaving? Jamie met his eyes. Yes. And for the first time since Nate had canceled the future everyone else planned for him, he understood that Jamie was not automatically waiting inside whatever future came next. Jamie placed the blue folder on Nate's desk at exactly 8:27 Tuesday morning. My final day can be Friday, he said. That gives me enough time to transfer the remaining accounts and train whoever replaces me. Nate looked at the folder, but did not open it. You already accepted the Chicago position? Yes. When do they expect you? 3 weeks from Monday. Nate leaned back. Then stay until the end of next week. Jamie's expression changed immediately. Why? Because replacing you in 4 days is impractical. That sounds like a company problem. You are still employed by the company. And my contract requires 2 weeks of notice, which I already provided in writing. Nate stopped. Jamie was right. Worse, Nate recognized what he was doing. He had discovered a future he did not want and immediately started rearranging the pieces until they looked more acceptable. Friday is fine, he said. Jamie blinked. That was unexpectedly reasonable. Do not sound so surprised. I have 3 years of evidence. Nate almost smiled. Then we should use the time efficiently. The next 4 days were some of the strangest Nate could remember. News of the canceled wedding traveled through Boston quickly, but Jamie never asked for details. He simply worked. He trained a temporary assistant, transferred schedules, organized contacts, and removed his personal notes from the systems one by one. Nate watched small traces of Jamie disappear from his professional life. By Thursday, someone else was managing his calendar. Nate hated the new arrangement almost immediately. The replacement assistant scheduled a breakfast meeting at 7:30, placed champagne on a dinner reservation, and booked Nate into 3 consecutive crowded events without a break. Each mistake was minor. Each one reminded Nate how much Jamie had learned without ever demanding recognition for it. Thursday evening, Nate found Jamie alone at his desk labeling the last archive folders. Chicago can wait, Nate said. Jamie did not look up. That sounds suspiciously like the beginning of an order. It was. Jamie finally met his eyes. Nate exhaled. Let me try again. I would like you to stay in Boston. Why? The answer arrived too quickly. Because I do not want you to leave. Jamie's face softened for only a second. That is not enough. I can increase your salary. Jamie actually laughed. There he is. What? The man who solves uncomfortable situations with contracts. Nate frowned. I am offering you a reason to stay. You are offering me a reason to keep being your assistant. Jamie stood. That is exactly what I cannot do anymore. Nate's voice lowered. Then do not be my assistant. Silence followed. Jamie stared at him. What are you saying? I am saying you can remain in Boston without working for me. And then what? Nate had negotiated acquisitions with clearer answers than the one he had now. Then we figure out what this is. Jamie shook his head. No. Nate had not expected the word to hurt. No. You canceled your wedding yesterday, Nate. You spent 8 months preparing to marry someone else. Now I tell you how I feel. And suddenly you want me to stay so we can figure out what this is. Jamie stepped closer, not angry, but painfully calm. You are doing it again. Doing what? Finding a problem and trying to solve it before you understand it. Nate went still. Jamie continued. You did the right thing by ending a marriage you did not want. But that decision belongs to you and Grant. It does not create an obligation for me. I never said it did. Then let me leave. Nate looked at him for a long moment. Everything instinctive in him resisted the idea. He wanted to offer more money, another position, an apartment, anything that would keep Jamie within reach. That was precisely why he finally understood what Jamie needed from him. All right, Nate said. Jamie's expression faltered. All right. You accepted Chicago before any of this happened. You made that choice for yourself. I will respect it. Jamie looked almost disappointed by how much the answer affected him. Thank you. Nate nodded toward the folders. Human resources will complete everything tomorrow. Your references will be excellent. I expected nothing less. You should. You earned them. Friday afternoon arrived quietly. Jamie cleared his desk, returned his company badge, and stood outside Nate's office holding a single cardboard box. Nate walked him to the elevator. Neither spoke until the doors opened. Jamie stepped inside, then turned. Take care of yourself. Nate almost said that Jamie had always done that for him. Instead, he answered, I will learn. Jamie smiled faintly. Goodbye, Nate. Goodbye, Jamie. The doors closed. Nate stood alone in the hallway and understood something he had spent his entire life avoiding. Having the power to stop someone did not mean he had the right to do it. 30 days after Jamie left Crawford Group, Nate finally learned how many ordinary things could not be delegated. His new assistant, Melissa Carter, was excellent, organized, and completely uninterested in guessing what Nate needed before he said it. On her second morning, she placed a schedule on his desk and asked, "Do you want a lunch break today?" Nate almost answered that she should decide based on the meetings. Then he stopped. "Yes, 45 minutes. Melissa wrote it down. "Anything else?" "No meetings after 6 unless they are urgent." "Define urgent." Nate stared at her for a moment. Jamie would have known. That thought arrived automatically, as it had almost every day for a month. Anything that cannot reasonably wait until morning. Melissa nodded and left. Nate looked at the quiet office and realized that learning to state what he wanted was surprisingly difficult for a man accustomed to everyone anticipating him. The canceled wedding had disappeared from the newspapers within a week. Business agreements between the Crawford and Whitmore families were renegotiated rather than destroyed. Grant had taken a long-planned trip to California and sent Nate exactly one photograph from the Pacific coast with the message, "We should have canceled sooner." Nate had replied, "Agreed." Life had continued. Jamie, however, had not gone to Chicago. Nate learned that accidentally when the human resources director mentioned Jamie's former employer verification. The Chicago company had delayed his start date after restructuring, and Jamie had accepted a position with a Boston design and events firm instead. Nate's first instinct was immediate. Find the address, call Jamie, ask why he had not said anything. He did none of those things. Jamie had asked for the right to make his own decisions. Nate intended to prove he had finally listened. So another week passed. Then another. Nate stopped checking whether Jamie might appear in the lobby. He learned to manage his own meals. He told Melissa when he needed quiet between events instead of expecting her to notice. He even bought his own tea one night after a late meeting. Although the first cup was terrible because he had forgotten which kind Jamie used to order. On the 30th day, Nate sat alone in his office at 7:10 in the evening with no meetings left and no practical reason to remain. His phone rested beside him. Jamie's number was still there. Nate opened their old messages. The final exchange had been painfully professional. Transition files attached. Company property returned. Thank you for everything. Nate typed, "I heard you stayed in Boston." He stared at the sentence, then deleted it. It sounded like surveillance. He tried again. "I would like to see you." Deleted. Too much assumption. Nate leaned back and almost laughed at himself. He had faced boardrooms full of hostile executives with less difficulty than one empty message box. Finally, he typed exactly what he meant. "Would you have dinner with me if I am no longer your boss?" He read it twice before sending it. The message showed delivered. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Nate put the phone face down and forced himself to review a report. At 7:28, the phone vibrated. Jamie had replied, "That depends." Nate typed on what. The answer came immediately. "Whether you are asking because you miss having an assistant or because you miss me." Nate stared at the screen. A month earlier, he might have answered with something controlled and carefully worded. Tonight, he chose the truth. "I have an excellent assistant. I still miss you." 3 dots appeared, vanished, then appeared again. Jamie finally replied, "Better." Nate smiled despite himself. "Dinner Thursday?" he asked. Jamie answered, "That still sounds like you are scheduling a meeting." Nate frowned at the screen. "What am I supposed to say?" Jamie's response arrived seconds later. "Ask me properly." Nate understood. He put down the phone, picked it up again, and called. Jamie answered after 3 rings. "Hello." Hearing his voice after a month made Nate forget the sentence he had prepared. Jamie waited. "Nate." "Jamie Brooks. Would you like to have dinner with me Thursday evening, with no business agenda, no employment discussion, and absolutely no expectation attached to your answer?" Silence followed. Then Jamie laughed softly. "That might be the most careful invitation anyone has ever given me. I have been practicing." Apparently. Nate waited without filling the silence. Finally, Jamie said, "Yes, I would like that." Nate felt something loosen in his chest. 7. 7 works. I can send a car. Another silence. Nate closed his eyes. "Or you can get there however you want." Jamie laughed again. "You really have been practicing." Nate looked out over Boston, smiling for the first time that day. 30 days. Jamie's voice softened. "I noticed." Thursday evening, Jamie arrived at the small Italian restaurant in Beacon Hill at 6:58 and found Nate waiting outside, instead of at a private table surrounded by security and staff. For several seconds, Jamie simply looked at him. "What?" Nate asked. "I am checking for hidden assistants." Melissa went home at 5:30. "Security? Nearby, not joining us for dinner." Jamie nodded thoughtfully. "Promising start." Nate opened the restaurant door, then paused. "Would you like to go inside?" Jamie smiled. "Very impressive. I am beginning to suspect you are enjoying this." "A little." Dinner felt strange for the first 10 minutes because neither of them had a schedule to discuss. Nate did not ask about clients. Jamie did not remind him about meetings. They were simply two men sitting across from each other while a server brought bread and water. Finally, Nate said, "How is the new job?" Jamie raised an eyebrow. "Is employment discussion allowed?" "Personal curiosity." "Then it is good. I am coordinating design projects and events instead of someone's entire life." "That sounds easier." "It is not. But when I leave the office, nobody calls because they forgot what kind of tea they drink." Nate looked offended. "That happened once." "For times. I dispute your records." Jamie laughed, and some of the tension disappeared. They talked about ordinary things after that. Jamie told Nate about a client who had changed an event color scheme 6 times in one afternoon. Nate admitted that Melissa had forced him to define what counted as an urgent meeting. "How did that go?" Jamie asked. "Poorly. I am shocked." I eventually answered. "Growth." Nate smiled. "You would be unbearable as a therapist." Fortunately, I charge more for emotional consulting. By the time their meals arrived, Jamie realized something important. Nate was not trying to persuade him to return. He had not offered money, a new position, or a solution disguised as generosity. He was listening. That made the question Jamie had been avoiding harder to ignore. "Why did you wait 30 days? Nate set down his glass. "Because you asked me to let you leave. You could have contacted me afterward. I wanted to know whether missing you was simply discomfort with change." Jamie's expression softened. Nate continued. "I had spent 3 years allowing you to manage parts of my life I should have learned to manage myself. If I contacted you immediately, I would not have known whether I wanted Jamie Brooks or the person who made everything easier. And now," Nate met his eyes. "Melissa makes my workday easier." Jamie waited. "I still wanted to call you." For once, Jamie had no quick reply. Nate did not rush to fill the silence. "What about Grant?" Jamie finally asked. "We spoke last week. He is doing well. Do you regret canceling?" "No," Nate answered without hesitation. "But I regret waiting until someone else forced me to question why I was getting married." Jamie looked down at the table. "I never wanted to be the reason." "You were not the reason. You were the interruption." Jamie looked up. Nate explained. "I was moving through a future everyone considered practical. Seeing your apartment interrupted that momentum long enough for me to ask whether it was mine." Jamie remembered the wall of schedules, the packed suitcases, and Nate standing in the middle of everything he had never been meant to see. "And what future do you want now?" he asked. Nate smiled faintly. "I am trying not to plan one before dinner is over." Jamie laughed. "That may be your greatest achievement." When they stepped outside shortly after 9, the street was quiet and cool. Nate stopped beneath the restaurant awning. "I would like to see you again." Jamie studied him. "That sounds suspiciously like a statement." Nate sighed. "You are going to make me work for every improvement, are you not?" "Probably." Nate nodded. "Jamie, would you like to have dinner with me again?" Jamie let him wait just long enough to make the lesson memorable. "Yes." Nate smiled. "Next Thursday?" "No." Nate's smile vanished. Jamie continued. "Saturday afternoon. Coffee. My neighborhood. I choose the place." Nate considered it. "All right." Jamie smiled. "Look at that. No negotiation. I am capable of learning." Jamie started toward his rideshare, then turned back. "Nate." "Yes." "For what it is worth, I missed you too." Nate went completely still. Jamie climbed into the car before he could respond. As the vehicle pulled away, Jamie looked through the rear window and saw Nate standing beneath the warm restaurant lights with an expression Jamie had rarely seen during 3 years at his side. The powerful alpha who had always known what came next had no plan at all, and for the first time, that seemed exactly right. 3 months later, Jamie stood in his apartment staring at the wall that had once held every detail of Nate's wedding and wondered how something so empty could feel so different. The schedules were gone. The seating charts were gone. The handwritten reminders had disappeared into recycling weeks ago. In their place hung a framed print Jamie had bought from a neighborhood artist, and Beneath it, a simple calendar with almost nothing written on the coming weekend. That had become important to him. For 3 years, his life had revolved around anticipating what someone else needed next. Now he had his own job, his own schedule, and a relationship with Nate that existed outside both. They had taken things slowly. Coffee became dinner. Dinner became Saturday walks, bookstore visits, and evenings when Nate somehow managed to arrive without an agenda. He still had security nearby when necessary, still carried the quiet authority that made crowded rooms notice him, and still approached most problems as if they were negotiations waiting to be won. But with Jamie, he had learned the difference between offering and deciding. On Saturday afternoon, Nate arrived carrying a narrow paper bag. Jamie opened the door and looked at it suspiciously. If that contains work, you are leaving. It does not. A contract? No. A 5-year strategic plan. Nate gave him a patient look. May I come inside? Jamie smiled and stepped aside. Nate entered, then stopped when he saw the wall. For a moment, neither man spoke. It looks different, Nate said. That is generally what happens when you remove 47 pages of wedding logistics. There were 47. You were not supposed to know that. Nate glanced at him. I was not supposed to see any of it. The memory no longer hurt the way it once had. Jamie leaned against the table. What is in the bag? Nate handed it over. Jamie opened it and found a small hardcover planner bound in dark blue cloth. He looked at Nate cautiously. You bought me a calendar? Apparently. Jamie opened the cover. The first page was completely blank. So was the second. In fact, Nate had written nothing anywhere. This may be the least useful planner ever created. That was intentional. Jamie looked up. Nate seemed unusually uncertain, which Jamie had learned was when he was most likely to say something that mattered. When I first came here, Nate said, that wall contained a future everyone had already organized for me. My family, Grant's family, the planners, the company, even you. Jamie lowered his eyes. I was doing my job. I know. And I was letting everyone else decide what made sense because it was easier than admitting I had never decided what I wanted. Nate nodded toward the blank planner. I do not want to do that again. Jamie ran his thumb along the edge of the cover. So this is your dramatic way of saying you have finally stopped scheduling your entire life? Absolutely not. Melissa would resign. Jamie laughed. Nate smiled, then continued more softly. I am saying I do not want anyone planning what happens between us before we choose it. Jamie's smile faded into something warmer. Not even you. Especially not me. Nate stepped closer, but left enough space for Jamie to close it if he wanted. Whatever happens next, I want us to decide together. Jamie looked at the empty pages again. Months earlier, he had believed leaving was the only choice that truly belonged to him. Now Nate was standing in the same apartment, not asking Jamie to return to his old job, not offering him a carefully designed future, and not pretending affection gave him authority. He was simply leaving space. Jamie picked up a pen from the table and opened the planner to Saturday. All right. Nate watched him write. What are you putting? Jamie finished and turned the book around. Saturday, 2 o'clock, coffee with Nate. Nate stared at it. We already had coffee. Then we successfully completed our first joint decision. Very efficient. Do not ruin the moment. Nate laughed, and Jamie closed the planner. Then he reached for Nate's hand, a small choice made without obligation, instruction, or expectation. Nate's fingers closed gently around his. Jamie looked at the empty wall, then at the blank pages waiting for whatever came next. Once, he had spent countless hours preparing Nate for a future neither of them had questioned. Now there was no wedding schedule, no family arrangement, and no predetermined ending waiting for them. There were simply 2 men standing together with time ahead of them and the freedom to decide how they wanted to use it. For Jamie, that was more meaningful than any promise someone else could have written for them.